Well, it was not something that was initiated by me. I was actually asked by the Kitchener Blues Festival a number of times as a fundraiser for the Kitchener Blues Festival. They asked me to put on a special show of some kind. One year I thought, well, we'll do the music of Ray Charles, So we involved a lot of people, a whole bunch of singers that would all sing one Ray Charles song. So it involved a lot of people, and they liked that idea. So the next year, they said, well, instead of just a fundraiser, why don't you come to the festival and do something else like that would involve a lot of people. So the last waltz was one of the first things I thought of, just because of all the guests that could be involved and the fact there was a 5-piece band, horn section, and so on. So it was really supposed to be a one-off thing. And we did this, I think this was 2010, and we did it for the Kitchener Blues Festival. We found, as we learned all the songs, it reminded us of how good it all was, So we found we had a good time doing it, and then the people really reacted to it, very strongly. And the kind of reaction we got even on Facebook afterwards, I was having people from the band calling me saying, we should do this again. And I had people in the audience saying we should do this again. So that's how it happened. It was really not something that I had set out to do at all. I'm awfully glad I did, because I really believe that the band is an important part of our cultural musical heritage, Canadian heritage. And a lot of times as Canadians, we don't trumpet and celebrate our own enough, especially these accomplishments. These people were known worldwide, and these songs traveled the world. And unfortunately, 3 of them have passed on. So there's not much of an opportunity to hear this music live anymore. And there's a lot of people who haven't. And probably one of the more surprising things for me is that 30% of our audience is usually under 30. Between the band of Bob Dylan and that whole sort of roots music, as you know, at Mariposa, the roots music scene, it's really come alive with people playing real instruments and playing. And the band sort of created the whole roots genre in the first place. It was this mix of all those kind of things, gospel, Appalachian kind of tunes, and Cajun and French Canadian tunes. So it's a really it's a great project, and we've been honored to do it. I think the band did have, I think they did pave the road, because, at first I'm sure most Americans didn't know they were Canadian, They sort of found out in the last waltz because they showed up with all these Canadian friends, Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and so on, Ronnie Hawkins. It was originally from Arkansas, but I think they did. Anytime a Canadian artist break through internationally, it helps other artists. This is the funny thing that sometimes musicians, artists don't realize, that the success of any one person from a country, look what happened to the Beatles in England, really does help all the other artists. It turns the attention of the world towards them. I think more than that, though, what it does is it inspires people in the country themselves. It inspired a lot of Canadians. It inspired me. I'm from Ottawa. The Ottawa Valley was sort of just what the band was about. You still had old-time fiddle players in Ottawa. The radio had an old-time fiddle show on, And so when you had a tune like Rag Mama Rag come along, you went, well, this sounds familiar, like this sounds like down the street, So I think that sort of thing that you heard, and when you heard the Cajun influences or the French Canadian influence of Acadian driftwood or something like that, you went, wow, I recognize that. That's our music, So they did inspire a lot of stuff, and I think especially their personalities. Like I say at times in the show that they have a tune and a record called Stage Fright, and they were always ambivalent about fame. As good Canadians, they were uncomfortable with it. You could tell they were uncomfortable with it. Maybe it's because they saw what happened to Bob Dylan, personally saw what happened to him with that kind of fame. But I think it's more that four of them were just young men from small towns in southern Ontario, Simcoe, Ontario. This is just a small farming community, thrown on the world stage, and they were a little uncomfortable with it. So here on their cover, the picture on Rolling Stone, their cover picture on Rolling Stone, they had their back to the camera. You know, this is so quintessentially Canadian. It's funny, you know. And I think that's what I liked about them, you know, that there was no showbiz about them. And as a matter of fact, when they actually they ended up doing their second album, at least the second half of it, in Los Angeles, at Sammy Davis Jr.'s house. They actually rented that, or what I guess used to be his house, and they recorded Cripple Creek and all these sort of songs there. The neighbors used to call them mountain men. they thought they'd come right down from the mountain because they had these beards and they just looked so different, you know. And part of their difference was the fact that to Americans, they didn't recognize where these guys are coming from and all these sort of influences they had. They sounded like they're from the South because of Levon, but then other things they did, they weren't from New Orleans, they weren't from Tennessee. Like, they could tell they weren't from here, and because of that, they weren't tied to any sort of tradition either. They could just go into America and pick up, as they traveled around, they just pick up these different roots, influences, and then make it their own, you know. So that was quite important.
Mm-hmm.
I've had contact with, I've met Levon and Garth Hudson. I actually produced a record for.
Okay.
So I've met both them. I hadn't met the other three. But putting the show together, it was after I'd worked on Garth's project. I'd done produced a solo piano record called Live at the Wolf with Garth and Rod Hudson, and put it out on my record label. But working with Garth was such a thrill because, I mean, I was a fan anyways, but being around somebody like that, he's quite a genius. I mean, really, literally, quite a genius. And he was playing piano exclusively at that time. And after the recording, we actually did a few concerts, one in near Aurelia, where I played organ and Garth played piano, which was quite intimidating because he's such an incredible organist. And to actually have to go, he didn't want to play organ at all. So I had my Hammond organ and I played organ. And of course, anybody who saw these concerts, you know, he was really quite brilliant. He was always playing like Art Tatum, you know. And then he'd do an encore and he'd do a band song, but every night he would plan whatever song we were going to do. So as we were in the wings, as the people were applauding for the encore, he'd ask me, what do you want to do? And I would say, you know, well, I don't know. I know Cripple Creek, up on Cripple Creek. And this is while the audience is out there applauding. And he'd go, well, Levon doesn't like it when somebody else sings Cripple Creek. And we'd go through this argument about what song we were going to do. He's a very sweet guy, incredible knowledge about different kinds of piano playing. Probably the best accordion player I've ever heard. He has this encyclopedic knowledge on accordions and accordion music. He basically started playing Eastern European, Bulgarian accordion songs because he ran out of polkas to play and tarantellas. Now there are like thousands of polkas and there's probably equal number of tarantellas, and he had run out of them. So it was he's quite something to be around. Well, we're very honored to close the Mariposa Festival. You know, that's it's quite an honored position to do that, and we don't take it lightly at all. You know, I think it's great. I mean, I think for Canada's 150 to have as many sort of Canadian artists. The thing about, even though the band had Levon Helm, who was originally from Arkansas, although he's quite an adopted Toronto Sun, spent 10 years in Toronto. All the music was written by the Canadians, J.R. Robbie Robertson and Richard Manuel and Rick Danko. So most of the music, other than some of their guests that will perform, is Canadian music. And the unique thing about it is, because somebody will say to me, well, what about the night they drove Old Dixie down? This is not a Canadian song. Well, of course it's not, but it's, if you think about it, it's really written from a Canadian perspective. What was happening there was that Levon, who's such a good storyteller, was regaling Robbie and the rest of the band with all these stories about his upbringing. And then they would travel down to Arkansas and meet his dad. And in fact, his dad would tell him about these kind of stories and what, you know, that perspective and what the South really felt about the Civil War. And about, you know, the people who believed in this and when these cities fell. So that really touched Robbie, you know, that this would be something to write a song about. It just so happened that they just happened to have this Arkansas guy in the band that was a great storyteller. So he would write these things, but when you think of it, there's no Americans who were writing about that side of the Civil War. You know, it took Canadians to go down there and say, well, let's do it from this angle, you know, let's, and in that time, it wasn't a popular, this was during the Civil Rights Movement and everything, it wasn't really a popular angle to say, to have some sort of, you know, feelings for the South in the Civil War. And this happened in a lot of their songs. Now certainly they wrote songs like Acadian Driftwood and others about Canada itself and their experience. But I always say it as well that the voices of the band had a sort of northern angst to it. They had, and you hear it right away. And when you hear Americans sing band songs, there's way too much confidence in how they sing them. You know, there was just that thing, you know, that especially Rick and Richard, Rick Danko and Richard Manuel, the bass player and the piano player, they had this plaintiveness to the way they sang the songs that very Canadian for whatever reason. You know, there's a long treatise on why that would be the case, but it's there, you know. So we are. I think it's quite appropriate, you know, to have the band's music at Mariposa, and we're certainly honored to be here helping celebrate Canada's 150th. I think the enduring nature of it is that the songs were so good, both lyrically and musically. They're not easy songs to play. You find that out once you start playing them. All these musicians, just musician-wise, you play Rag Mama Rag. I mean, Garth Hudson is a real ragtime scholar, and he's a stride piano player. He played piano on that. It wasn't Richard Manuel. As a matter of fact, Richard Manuel was playing the drums on that recording. But it's not easy to play. So it's that combination of like folk-like music, roots music, but with the musicianship of people who really paid their dues and can really play. And all of them are like that. The other strange thing that, because they toured after Ronnie Hawkins, they were a rockabilly band, basically with Ronnie Hawkins, real outright rock and roll. And they were the top grossing act in Ontario at the time, bar act in Ontario. So they really knew how to put over a rockin' night. When they broke off themselves as Levon and the Hawks, they started playing the whole R&B book, all the Ray Charles tunes, all that, because Richard Manuel could sing Ray Charles and had that kind of voice and that kind of ear. So they did all that. When they were Levon and the Hawks, they were just an R&B band. It was quite a surprise to people who knew them when they came out, and probably the influence of Bob Dylan, when they came out with this whole other sort of roots-based sound, half country, half, you know, gospel, half all those influences. Nobody knew even what to call it. So, yeah, it's a I think it's that and because they touch so many styles, there's usually something in there you can relate to. You know, if you're a fan of jazz, if you're a fan of blues, you know, they do outright blues tunes. If you're really into rock and roll, and even when they were singing country, you could tell in Richard's voice there was this hint of R&B and Ray Charles. He didn't sound like country, didn't sound like Nashville, you know. And again, that made them not American. Like if you're a country performer, you sound like you're from Nashville. They didn't. So again, this was another Canadian sort of influence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we tried to, well, first off, this isn't a tribute show like certain tribute shows. Nobody's impersonating anybody.
Right.
Right? I just gathered some of the best players in the country, musicians, who also happen to really like the band. And we play in the style of, we do just like the band. They never played the same song the same way twice. We don't either, you know. We certainly do their arrangements. We have the same sort of musical setup. We have piano and organ, drums, bass, and guitar. We also have 4 horns and a tuba. So we can pull off those arrangements, you know. And yes, we do some of the, depending on what guests are available, we do some of the songs of the guests that showed up. The concert itself in San Francisco in 1976 was about 6 hours long. So we don't have that to do. So obviously we have to sort of pick and choose. But especially for Mariposa, I think the lion's share will be the band songs. And then, yeah, we will have, we have some special guests, a great singer, a young man out of Kitchener, Ontario, named Matt Weidiger. He's 24 years old. He's an amazing artist. He's a singer-songwriter, plays piano, plays Hammond organ incredibly well, also plays guitar, and sings like a bird. Real talent. And he'll be playing with us. Johnny Max, who's a great entertainer, blues entertainer, he'll be playing with us, singing with us as well. And we have this wonderful gospel singer from Toronto, right out of the church, Keisha Wint, and she'll be singing with us. So it's just 3 of the guests. We'll have some surprises as well. Well, we're really lucky to have Levon Helm's godson, Jerome Levon Avis, playing drums and singing with the band. This happened just by accident. When I was first asked to put this together, I remembered a kid in Peterborough getting up and singing Ophelia, playing the drums and singing. It's very unusual to play the drums and sing. There aren't that many of them. So when I was asked to do this, I thought, I'm going to try to find that kid. You know, he's a kid, he was in his 20s at the time. And sure enough, he was there. I had no idea he was connected to Levon in any way. I just knew that he had done this really well. Turns out his dad, Bill Avis, was the band's road manager from the time of Hawkins right through the last waltz and beyond. Knew Levon Helm for 52 years. They were best friends. I had no idea of this. I just knew this kid sang well. So Jerome is really the centerpiece of the band. It's the heart and soul of the band. He was very close to Levon. We also have Dennis Pinhorn, who was in one of the versions of the Hawks, playing bass. We have Terry Blursh, a wonderful guitar player from Toronto, who grew up listening to all those guitar players, Robbie, and all the guitar players who were influenced by Robbie Robertson. There's a whole lineage of them in Toronto who were influenced by Robbie. And then we have Rob Gusevs, who's just a wonderful Hammond organist. He's played with Blood, Sweat, and Tears, people like that. Kevin Bright, he was in Kevin Bright's band, and he's just a wonderful organist. And I play piano and sing on it as well.
Okay.
My favorite song, there's so many, that's always a hard thing to do, but I have to admit I have a special fondness for The Weight. I like the gospel flavor of it. Garth Hudson played piano on it. He does some really special things. He's just hinting at gospel. It's just, he's not really playing like a gospel pianist. He does his own thing, but it's hinting at it. I really love the fact that the actual title is never mentioned in the song.
That's right.
And that's a very unusual thing, you know, for a song. And as a lot of times when you say the wait, people go, "Oh, what song's the wait?" But as soon as you go, "I pulled into Nazareth," you know, they know what song it is. As soon as you hear that first line, "I pulled into Nazareth," and I did have Garth Hudson once go through every line with me and tell me where it was from.
Okay. So yeah, because I was listening to the lyrics yesterday, and I'm thinking these are very enigmatic kind of lyrics. I don't know.
It is. It's really enigmatic. Of course, as soon as you say Nazareth, people think there's a biblical thing, you know, biblical reference. In fact, it was about Nazareth, Pennsylvania, and they were just pulling into this town. But Robbie went with that illusion, and still, you know, he talks about Moses. He talks about, you know, he's playing with that double entendre, and so you never know really quite what it's from. But Garth went and named everybody in the song, and they're all real people, and there's a crazy Chester. There's, you know, he went by and named them all. It's all quite interesting. I can't remember everything because there's quite a bit of it, and Annie was a person.